Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Innovate South 2021. It's the third annual Innovate South. We're going to call Amos Schwartzfarb up to the stage here. But while he's doing that, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what the agenda looks like for today. Obviously, the last 30 minutes, we had a little bit of open networking for everybody. And we'll have a little bit of time break in between the sessions later on. If anybody, wanted to kind of jump around and talk to people a little bit more, you'll be able to do that around right after the second session. But we're going to jump into Levers overview with Amos in just a second, following up by the virtual handshake. So for anybody who's having trouble kind of transitioning from in-person sales strategies, marketing strategies to virtual and digital ones, I think this is going to be a great panel discussion for you. We're going to have a little bit of open networking after that. And then we're going to close it out with Brainstorm Better with Melanie Diesel, fantastic content creator who has some really great ideas on how to just create unlimited amounts of content. And I do want to say for everybody who's attending the sessions today, both for Amos's session and for Melanie's session, we're going to send everybody who participates their ebook. So you'll get a free copy of what they're going to talk about today in their book format. And both Amos's and Melanie's are bestsellers. Amos actually has two bestseller books. Both of them phenomenal. He's going to go over Levers today. And he also has Sell More Faster, which is a phenomenal book as well. And so we're going to jump straight into it. I'm going to introduce Amos. So Amos Schwartzfarb is the managing director of Techstars Austin and author of the best-selling books for startup sales, Sell More Faster, the ultimate sales playbook for startups, and Levers, the framework for building repeatability into your business. Amos began his career as a serial entrepreneur where he helped establish over 6 startups, including hotjobs.com, work.com, and Blacklocus and Jobs, before taking on his role at Techstars, where he has run 6 programs and invested in over 90 companies through the Techstars Austin Accelerator Program. Amos, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today to share your vast knowledge. I love your books. I think they're phenomenal. I tell people all the time that they're those books. I don't see a lot of these where I see a lot of the ones where it's very motivational sounding and you get pumped up to do something. But I'm like, okay, but what do I do? And your books, I think, have a lot of actionable items that you can actually implement right away. So thanks for that. Excited to hear your presentation today. Go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You guys can all hear me okay, I assume. If not, put a message in there so I know. And hey, Spencer, thanks for saying that. And Destin, thank you for saying such kind words. Really, really appreciate that. The thing that you said about the books being actionable, you can't hear me. Shh. You can hear me. Okay, thank you. I can't read, but you can hear me. Awesome. The thing that you said about the books being actionable is a bigger compliment than you might realize. With both books, really, one of the notions that I had and what we had, I have 3 co-authors for Levers, was that exactly what you just said. We didn't feel like there was enough tangible, here's what you should go do things out there. And that was one of our main goals. And so, I'll get off this topic in a second, but one of the most common pieces of feedback that we got early on, even before the book launched, was that the thing that some didn't like it, most did, but the thing that was really obvious about the book is that it's a book that you do, not a book that you read. So for those of you who end up jumping into it, you could probably breeze through the whole thing in an hour and a half. But if you actually want to go and do the work, it takes a long time. It may take you weeks to actually get through it. But the good news is I'm going to give you a quick overview of what it is today. So before you jump in, you might have a little bit of an idea of whether or not you want to spend your time there. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds of background on me, maybe 20 seconds, and then I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and then we'll jump into it. If there are questions, please feel free. I realize that in this format, it's a little bit harder to sometimes to make this interactive. I'm going to do my best today, since we're not in person, 1, to make it feel interactive and hopefully keep you, excited and listening and engaged. And 2, I would love for it to be as much of a conversation as possible. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on the right side of my screen, which has both the chat and the Q&A. and I will gladly try to jump in and ask any questions that might come along the way. Okay, so with that, I'm going to try to share my screen. When I did this previously in the testing, it didn't work, but I can do this without it if needed to be. And let's see. Yeah, running into the same issue. Okay, you're not getting a screen today. You're going to have to look at my face. I apologize. I'm not as pretty as the slides, but I will try to make it animated and be really clear with everything. All right, so start jumping in. I said a whole bunch of stuff about what levers, how to approach levers, but I imagine many of you have no idea what it actually is yet. So let me start with that. Levers is a series of workshops that my co-authors and I have been using really for decades in different iterations. And we didn't all know each other early on, but we all had similar philosophy that we've taken and put together and tested literally with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies, including ones that we've been a part of, into a 5-step process that is meant to put any company, regardless of stage, either on the path to repeatability or to understand better their repeatability if you believe you already have it. But the way that we think about it is, you're a company that hasn't yet figured out true repeatability. And when I mean repeatability, I mean you have a crystal ball, and assuming there's no outside changes in the market, you can look into your ball and you know exactly what will happen next month and next quarter, assuming there are no outside changes, because you have such a strong handle on the metrics of your business and the core elements that drive your business. It takes a long time to get there. And so what we are trying to do is provide you with a series of workshops and frameworks to give you the tools so that you can do the work, so that your crystal ball that, on day one, when you first start your business, is very, very cloudy. You have an idea of what you want to do, but you don't really know what you can do, and turn it into something that's very clear so that you can literally see the future of what is possible, assuming there's no outside changes outside of your control. So we talk about levers so I'll put this notion into your head as well. Between myself and my 3 co-authors, we've either been inside of as operators and or invested in, between the 4 of us, probably 600 or 700 companies, literally. And the one common thing that we have seen in businesses that are successful versus businesses that are not successful is that metrics-driven businesses win, period. When you truly can understand what those levers are, you pull on this, that will happen. And so if you only walk away with one thing from today, and I hope you walk away with more than one thing, if you only walk away from one thing today, it is, I need to go figure out how to be truly a metrics-driven business. Not metrics aware, which means I know what's happening, but metrics driven, meaning I know that when a metrics tells me this, I can see what will happen. And I know if I do more of this, I will expect more of that to happen with 99.99% degree of confidence. So that's the notion I want you to hopefully walk away with, at minimum, if nothing else, the belief that metrics driven businesses win. So while I talk about the framework is 5 elements, and we're going to go through a high level overview of what those elements are today, so that you may be able to walk away with, I think I can go do that. And if not, there's plenty of resources like the book where you can go dig deeper. Those 5 elements are truly understanding who you believe your customer is and collecting the data so that you know whether you're right or wrong. Truly understanding what your business model is and understanding what are the drivers of your business model. You'll hear me say revenue formula. I use revenue formula and business model interchangeably. But what are the true drivers? What are the levers? What are the things that can actually do to drive the pieces of your business model forward? The third is, when you know all of the things you need to go do between your figuring out your customer and figuring out your business model, how do you prioritize the things that you need to do now and next? The fourth framework is, how do you measure whether or not you're moving in a direction, much less the right direction? And then the final piece, which is really the culmination of everything together, is, how do you develop a metrics-driven plan so that you can go and execute and see where you're right or wrong, and eventually make that very foggy crystal ball very clear so that you know exactly what's happening. So those are the 5 pieces of the framework, and I'll go a little deeper on all 5 of those. But really, there's a 6th element that we talk about in the book in the appendix. But without this, it's really, really hard to make any of the other pieces work. And what that is your vision. How are you trying to change the world? And the world could be the entire world, or the world could be just the sliver of people service. But if you can close your eyes and in your mind's eye see, here's what I believe the world will look like in the future, or the world that I'm trying to influence, here's what it's going to look like in the future. Being able to try to articulate that is really the first step. Without that, it becomes very hard to make all of the elements work, because while you will be marching in a direction, if you don't know where the end point that you're hoping to get to is, it's hard to know whether you're marching in the right direction. So especially for those of you who are the founders, the chances are you have some, even if it's cloudy, some vision of what you believe the future is going to look like. And what I would strongly encourage you to do before you get into the LEVERS process or any process is to try to clearly articulate that among the whole co-founding team, so that all of the people that work within your organization and outside of your organization that you come in contact with can repeat back to you a clear idea of how you're trying to impact your version of the world in the future. So just think about that for 5 seconds, because I think it's a really, really important thing that sometimes gets overlooked, but is very important so that you know you're marching in the correct direction. Okay. So as I talked about, there are 5 pieces to the framework. The 5th one being, how do you build a metrics-driven plan? As we've worked on and delivered this process over and over again, we've experimented with the order of how this process delivers the best results. And so I'm going to deliver it to you today in what we believe is the right order, so that each piece builds off of the previous piece in a way that gives you everything you need to eventually build that metrics-driven plan. And that starts with, after you know your vision, who do you believe your customer is? I talk about this as figuring out your W3, and I'll explain what W3 means in a minute. But who do you think your customer is? So I want to change the world like this. That means you're going to be servicing somebody. It doesn't matter if you're a B2B company or a B2C company or a B2B2C company. There's some group of people that is ultimately paying you for your service, that you're trying to bring value to in a way that that is better than or different than whatever they're doing today, and that you believe is going to be impactful. And that's super important. And in my opinion, really important to be the staple and the foundation of everything else. Because if you're not really clear on who you're going to serve, it's hard to figure out how you're going to serve them, how to prioritize the way you're going to serve them, how to measure or not you are serving them or not, and how to build a plan to service them at scale. So thinking about it like that, I think about this notion and this framework that I've used for a long time called W3, which is answering 3 questions that are going to seem on the surface to be very simple questions. And the thing that makes it hard is the nuance and the specificity you need in order to do it in a way that you truly understand how to make your crystal ball a little less foggy. And those 3 questions are, and I'm going to go into detail on what I mean on all of them, but those 3 questions are, so who do you believe your customer is? What are they buying from you? Not what you're selling to them. And why do they buy your product? And I think my hope is that every founder out there heard those 3 questions, and probably their gut reaction was, yeah, I can answer those questions. Of course I can. That's the whole reason that I'm building the business I'm building. And that's great. That's an awesome start. And what I want to challenge you to do, and I'm going to give you examples of this, but what I want to challenge you to do, especially early on, is to think about the narrowest and most specific definition of who you believe your customer is, what they're buying, and why they're buying it. With the challenge of being, you are so sure you're right that you literally have a 100% success rate when someone meets all of the criteria of your who, what, and why. Now, a couple of things about that. The first is, in order to get to that level of specificity, it will likely feel really uncomfortable to you. You'll feel like you're limiting your potential customer base. You'll feel like you're limiting your total addressable market, and you may even worry that an investor may think that your business is too small. So I want to pause there and to be really clear. I am not suggesting this is the ending point. I'm suggesting this is the starting point. So if you think about, here's the world that I want to be able to serve at some point in the future, how do you get there? Well, there's a go-to-market strategy, and part of that strategy is being really clear on who is the customer that absolutely will buy my product today. That will give you a long list of attributes about the who, the what, and the why. And then once you truly understand that, you can start to build off of that list of attributes. You can take them away, you can add some in, you can change some around, and it'll start to broaden your potential customer base. So eventually, over the course of maybe many, many years, you'll reach your entire total addressable market. Okay, so let me take you through who, what, and why, and then we're going to move on to step 2. So who do you believe your customer is? And I really want to challenge you to think about the specificity here. So a bad example would be in the healthcare industry, we sell to hospitals. Like, that may feel pretty narrow, but to me, I hear that and I'm like, gosh, I don't know what to do with that. That is really, really broad. An example closer to what I'm looking for is, in the healthcare industry, we sell to hospitals. Those hospitals are private hospitals. Those private hospitals are between 500 and 1,000 employees. At those hospitals, we're always selling to the director of IT. The director of IT has always been in that particular hospital for less than 12 months, but has typically been in the industry in a hospital in a similar role for at least 5 years. And that particular director of IT has been challenged with figuring out how to take 3 legacy softwares and make them more efficient, both from a time and OpEx perspective. Big difference between those two things. And then finding that person may prove to be really challenging, but you will know that if you're right and you find that person, they'll say yes 100% of the time. And so now you have the beginning of your list of attributes, and you can start to build off and interchange attributes so that you can start to eventually get wider. Let me pause there for a couple of seconds just to see if anyone has any questions about that. And then I'll get into the what and the why. Cool. Hopefully this is still interesting to y'all. So this one's a little bit easier to explain, but it's a really interesting nuance that everyone, myself included, gets wrong all the time, which is what is your customer buying from you, not what are you selling? And to just be blunt, your customer doesn't care what you do. I'm sorry, they don't. What they do is they care what you do for them. And that's the nuance that we're looking for. And the example I'll give you is, I'm going to use Google as an example, since most of you probably know who Google is. And most of you probably know that one of Google's core products is a search product, where they have a platform and they sell search so that you can do what? You can buy something. You can buy from them leads. You can buy from them research. You can buy from them sales. When you wake up in the morning, you don't say, I know what's going to make my business better. I'm going to go buy search. You wake up and you say, where can I get customers, or where can I get research? And Google's search platform is one of those things. So I want you to think about that in terms of your customers, whether you're a B2C company or a B2B company. Not what are you selling to them, but what are they actually buying from you? The last piece of W3, figuring out your customer, is why. Why are they buying? And a great way for you to figure out why they are buying is asking them, how are you going to measure value? And believe it or not, this applies for B2C companies as well, right? They may not actually quantify the measurable value, but there's something that they will be able to describe to you in the value that they're getting from using your product or service. So the why is, why does it matter? Does it improve profit in their business? Does it improve margin in their business? Does it give them the ability to connect with people in a way they weren't able to connect with before? That seems important. And specific to B2B, there's actually 2 whys. And this is really critical because the second why is often overlooked. So the first why is, are you improving profit? Are you improving margin? Like, what are you doing that's impacting the business in a positive way? And so if you think about that, all of your who's and your what's may line up, and your business why may also line up. But for B2B sales, there's also a personal why, which is the actual buyer, what's in it for them. And so the example I'll give you there is, imagine your who seems to be exactly right, your what seems to be exactly right, the why on the business why seems to be exactly right, but the individual buyer doesn't get a bonus, doesn't get a base, they're not going to get a promotion, but you are going to create more work from them, right? So even if you're generating 10% extra in profit for their business, they don't get anything for it except extra work. So what's their motivation? And the thing I want to pause on there is, if you get to that point, what you've really discovered is that you're wrong on the who, because there's something missing and you're not able to get to a yes all the time. So it could be you have the wrong person in that organization, or it could be that that organization doesn't yet value the thing that you do enough in order to be a customer yet, even though all of the other things line up. So the last thought I'm going to leave you with here before we move to step 2 is truly understanding your who, your what, and your why, starting with a theory of what you believe, even if you have 100 customers, even if you have 1,000 customers today, a theory of what you believe is the perfect customer based on the things that you know, and then going out and testing that and being able to, with data, say, I know I'm right, and here is why, here is the data to suggest that, is critical in building a long-term, sustainable, repeatable business and a metrics-driven plan. So I'm gonna pause there for 5 seconds before I move into step 2. See if there's any questions. All right, cool. So once you know who your customer is, or you have an idea of what you're going to test there, the next piece I call finding your revenue formula. And if you can picture in your mind's eye, your revenue formula is like a simple math equation across the top of the page, which is your business model. It's your business. And I'll give you an example. Hopefully you can track it verbally since you won't see the visual cue, but I'll give you an example in just a second. But if you can just try to picture in your mind's eye this math equation, which is your business. So, if you were I'll give you a very simple example, and then I'll give you a more complex one. A simple example is you sell t-shirts online. So number of customers times number of t-shirts per customer times price per t-shirt gives you revenue. That's a very simple example. That's your revenue formula right there. What's really important about digging into your revenue formula is, well, starting with trying to understand what you believe that revenue formula is, what that business model is, but more importantly are the list of drivers and sub-drivers underneath that. So what are the things that actually mean I can have more customers, or I can sell more t-shirts per customer, or I can optimize price? What are the drivers in each one of those categories that allow me to do that? So if you were looking at the screen right now, you would actually see a different example that I use of a company I was a part of called business.com. You'd see 5 things across the top. It would be users, visitors. I'm just going to read it off the screen instead of trying to remember it. Visitors times coverage times conversion rate times CPC equals revenue. So for business.com, the number of people that showed up on a website had to show up on a page where there was actually something they can engage with. Then they had to go, which is coverage. Then they had to actually engage with something on that page on the website. That's conversion rate. And then the value of the thing that they engage with would be how business.com made money. Underneath that, the thing that you would see on my screen is for visits, for example, you'd see 5 boxes. Those boxes would be the main drivers of visits to the website: direct traffic, paid traffic like Google or Facebook or whatever, going to trade shows, PR campaigns, radio advertising, as 5 examples. So those are your drivers, and there's probably more, but those are your drivers of visits to the website. Now, each one of those drivers has things to do in order to actually become a meaningful driver to understand how you can control visits. So as an example, and I realize this may be hard to visualize without a picture, but as an example, if you were looking at paid advertising, so I got visits. One of the ways you can get visits is by getting paid advertising. Well, that's pretty broad still. So I can go to Google, I can go to Facebook, I can go to Twitter, I can go to LinkedIn, right? There's probably multiple other places you can go. What are the things that you need to do in order to prove or disprove whether paid advertising is the right way or a right way for you to drive visits for this particular business? Extrapolate that out across your entire revenue formula, and it gives you this massive list of all the things you need to do, build, or prove over time so that you gain maximum control of your revenue formula. Those 4 key elements that equal revenue, so that you truly understand, if I pull on this lever, something will happen. And when I understand all of those levers, my crystal ball becomes much, much more clear. Let me pause there for just a second. See if there's any questions that pop up. And again, I know it's sometimes hard to ask questions in this forum. So if you're thinking something, please ask it, because chances are 10 other people are thinking something similar. Cool. So what we did so far was we talked about who do we believe our customer is and all of the potential data we need to collect to start to prove whether we're right or figure out that we're not. The second thing we did is we said, okay, we have an idea of what we believe our revenue formula is. We feel really good about that. And we've listed out all of the drivers and subdrivers, which is essentially all of the things you need to do, build, or prove in order to prove that your revenue formula is the right revenue formula. So if you think about all that, we've just created a whole bunch of work to do and a whole bunch of data to collect. There's a lot there, and probably more than any billion-dollar company can do, much less a startup. So you got a lot of stuff to do. So what do you do with it? And this brings us to step 3. Step 3 we call validating assumptions. And so we'll put 1 and 2 aside, but they'll come back into play in just a second. Step 3 is an exercise where you literally go through and you say, what are all of the known assumptions in the business today? You're just writing them all down. Sticky notes, lots of sticky notes when you do the exercise the way that we teach it. And then you're systematically going through all of those sticky notes, and you're doing 2 things. First, you're writing which are the ones that are validated versus which are the ones that are not yet validated. And this is really important, and we'll get to why in a second. So you've got a whole list of things to do, which are validated, which are not validated. And then you go back through and you say, regardless of whether it's validated or not, which are high priority and which are low priority. Okay. Then before you can actually use it, there's another step, which is comparing all of this to the first 2 workshops and say, okay, did I miss anything, or is there anything that's included in my list of assumptions, so that I'm, something may have popped out that I didn't include in my revenue formula, or something in my revenue formula isn't included here. And it should help you ask and answer a bunch of questions like why? Like, why did it come up in my revenue formula yet it's not in my assumptions? Or why is it popping up as an assumption that is unvalidated but high priority, even though it's not showing up in my customer, my W3 or my revenue formula? And then you can just add it in. So it's fine if things should pop up, right? This is a way to try to get the list as inclusive as possible. And the next piece is you essentially take all of that and you map it out, and it'll be a quadrant where your top right will be all of the things that are high priority and validated. These are the things that you're doing. You're either doing them already on a regular basis and they're on repeat, or they're the things that you can actually go build that you've been trying to figure out, but you know that this is something that you need to build or execute on in order to make it repeatable. The top left are your high priority unvalidated assumptions. And these are like the core things in your business. And early on, these are like, is my business even going to work? Like, these things need to be validated to know if I'm not wasting my time and money or not. These are the things that you need to go do more research on. And highly likely, a lot of that will come out of your W3 and out of your revenue formula. Okay, there might be 2 things there, there might be 20 things there, right? And it's a snapshot relative in time. So if you did this exercise monthly, which a lot of companies I work with do, these things are all moving around as you learn new things, right? Things that were high priority, unvalidated may move over to validated. Things that are low priority might move up to high priority, etc. The other 2 quadrants are your low priority, validated and unvalidated assumptions. And depending on your stage, but in most cases, even for really big companies, that's the stuff you shouldn't be working on. So if you are, you have to ask yourself why. Are you working on it because you've misclassified it and it's actually a high priority? Or are you working on it because it's easy and you want to feel like you've accomplished something, which sometimes is okay, but be honest with yourself, because really most of the stuff that matters is right up here in the high priority validated and high priority unvalidated boxes. And it's a really clear way to see all of that. I'm going to pause there for a second before I jump into step 4, see if there's any questions. By the way, if anyone disagrees with anything I'm saying, I love debating about it, and I'm not always right. So bring it on. Yeah, Rob, what's your question? I think you're typing it, so I'll give you a second. What about the nonprofit world? That's a great question, and I've worked with a handful of nonprofits, and the thing that I have found that seems to work the best is changing the word revenue formula to impact formula. And I don't mean impact in the investing sense, although it probably is semi-synonymous. But what I mean is create an impact formula. What is the thing you're trying to change in the world? Are you trying to, bring the world temperature down by 0.5 degree? Are you trying to reduce carbon emissions? Are you trying to get people activated? What is the thing you're trying to impact? And then think about all of the elements of your impact formula or the things that are going to drive that. And everything else should work more or less the same. Give me a thumbs up or something if that answers your question, or a follow-up if you have one. Okay, I'm going to assume we're good, but pop it back out there if there's more that you want to ask about. Good question. I'm really glad you asked that. In fact, one of my co-authors on the book, Cody Sims, he founded an organization called Climate Changemakers and is currently raising a climate-focused fund. And he used this entire process inside of Climate Changemakers, which is actually where we experimented with for the first time the idea of an impact formula. You can call it a value formula, where we first experimented with it. Yeah, disaster response for sure. So think about the specificity, like what are you trying to change in a disaster response, right? And be comfortable with the replacement for revenue impact. You might have an idea of what it is and it might change. That's okay, right? This is about learning so that you can be focused on the right things. Thanks for that question. Moving on to step 4. Step 4 is how do you know you're right? Or how do you know you're heading in the right direction? So going back over everything, we started with, here's how I want to change the world, our mission. Then we said, okay, great. Who are we going to serve? Who do we believe our customer is? And then we said, okay, now that we have a belief and know what the data is that we need to go collect, what is our revenue formula? Or in the case of Rob, what is our impact formula? How do we actually make money or make the change that we're going to make? And how do we know what all those drivers are? Right? Give us a whole list of stuff we've got to work on. The third thing was, the third part is, okay, now that I have all of this, like, how do I make sense of it? What do I do now and next? And so we gave you a way to prioritize high priority, low priority, validated, unvalidated, saying, okay, you should be on wash, rinse, repeat, or building the stuff that is validated. And then for the high priority unvalidated, this is the stuff you got to go do research on. The fourth piece is, and probably everybody on here has heard about KPIs. If not, they're your key performance indicators of your business. The fourth piece is a framework specific to the first 3 steps that allows you to really clearly figure out what are the right KPIs to measure the things you're doing to try to impact the work that you're doing. So let me step back from that for just a second, and then I'll try to draw a mental picture for you of what our framework looks like. There's a couple of notions that are really, really important here. The first is your revenue formula, or if you're in Rob's case, your impact formula. That's your high-level dashboard. Those are metrics that from a top-level business perspective, you want to be tracking on a regular basis. And when you get to the point where you know you have the right formula, that is your high-level dashboard. So there's 2 points that I want to make about that. The first point is that's not your KPIs. Your KPIs are the things that you're doing to influence your dashboard. So, and your KPIs, they could change day to day, probably not that frequently most of the time, but they could change week to week or month to month, depending on what it is you're working on and when you feel like you've gotten to a point where I have either validated or invalidated that the thing that I was working on is right or wrong. And so as we think about KPIs, particularly in this framework, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about things that we're doing today, this week, this month, and how we're measuring whether or not it is unlocking for us the things that we're trying to do. So that word unlocking is really important. Laurel, thank you. Took me off for a second when I saw your name, but that's very true. That's an important thing I missed, which is put the numbers into your revenue formula. So unlock it for your KPIs. That notion of unlocking is really, really important. The first piece is that the way that we set up our framework, everything you're doing should be unlocking something for the future. So if you're learning, how to drive customers through your funnel, learning how to do that, right? Learning how to give better demos, for example, should unlock something for you. So if we learn how to give better demos, then the thing we're trying to influence next might be converting more demos to sales, right? So it could be that, for example, just more demos will convert it, which means you already know how to do that, but you can get all the demos you want all day long, but you don't know how to convert them to sales. So learning how to convert more demos to sales might be an example of a KPI that unlocks something for you. It unlocks you the ability to close more sales. So a really important notion in this. And this is something that's it's confused often until companies truly become metrics driven. And that's the difference between a leading indicator metric and a lagging indicator metric. So going back to your revenue formula, your high-level dashboard, those are all typically lagging indicators of what has already happened in the business. They're telling you, this is what we did. When you think about KPIs, key performance indicators, you should be thinking about leading metrics, meaning when I do this thing, I can expect this other thing to happen next. So when I give more demos, I should expect there to be more sales. That would be an example of a leading indicator. The number of demos should indicate the number of sales. And then if the number of sales go down, you have that plus other things to look at and say, what of my leading indicators changed from the past that would have made the end result number look differently? And when you get really good at this, you actually see those numbers changing before it affects the end result so that you can do something about it when possible. So the framework that we use, it looks just like, if you can picture that in your eye, it's a spreadsheet, and it basically says, what is the thing you're trying to do? What will that unlock for you? Be really clear. If you do this thing, it will help you do something else differently or better than you've been able to do before. And it may be revenue, or it may be something much further down the chain. And then what are the 3 ways that you can measure whether or not you are actually headed in the right direction? Those are your KPIs. And I think an important thing that I really, really, really want to stress here is getting your KPIs right, especially early on. No matter how metrics driven you've been in the past, no matter how data driven you already are, it is really hard to get right in the beginning. Not because you can't look at something and say like, oh, if I do this, then I should be headed in the right direction. It's because this might not be the right thing. You might think it's the right thing, but you're not really sure. And so the reason I say that is I want to let everyone here like take a deep breath, let you off the hook a little bit. You're probably not going to get it right away. It's probably going to be a long iterative process of learning. And so approach figuring out your KPIs and how to become metrics driven with that in mind. You're trying to learn so that in the future, that foggy crystal ball can become more clear and more clear. It is unlikely you're going to flip a switch and your foggy crystal ball is going to be clear. I have never heard of that happening. If it happens to you, please tell me. I want to learn from you. Most of the time, it's a long iterative process. And so I just want to set you up for that. Be prepared. It's okay. It should be fun. It can be really, really fun. Pause there for a second, see if there's any questions before I move into the last step. And after the last step, I'm going to open it up again for questions. We're probably going to end a little bit early, so I'm more than happy to stay on for the entire time and talk and shoot shit and answer questions. Let me give you 30 seconds to see if there's any more questions. 5 seconds. I'll take a drink while you do that. Okay, so in the last 35 or so minutes, we've been talking about the step-by-step process to start to do the things in your business that help you get clarity and validation that what you believe, how you believe you're going to change the world is actually possible, and how to get closer and closer to it so that, I love the crystal ball analogy, so that when you look in your crystal ball, you start to be able to see what the future will actually look like, and you have a much more clear path of getting there. And I think before I jump into the fifth and final step, the thing that I really want to drive home, I think as entrepreneurs, and I've been a multiple time founder myself, I think we all go in thinking it's going to be easier and faster than is reality. And as long as I've been doing this, which is a really long time, I still get sometimes caught up in that, because in my mind, it's really clear, but where the rubber actually hits the road, there's tons of details that are really hard to see in advance. There's all sorts of outside things that come into play that are nearly impossible for any single human to be able to anticipate. And so the thing that I want to be really clear about is that this is a long journey, right? When I'm making investments into early stage companies, my expectation is that if there's ever a liquidity event, it's probably 10 or more years away from the day that I'm making my investment. And as a founder, sometimes, especially if you're a first or second time founder, you're like, oh, there's no way it's going to be 10 years. 10 years is so long. Well, it is a long time. But the reality is, if you want to build a long-term sustainable business where you truly are metrics driven, you truly have repeatability, and truly your crystal ball is relatively clear, and you're providing amazing value to the people that you're trying to service, that's what it takes. It takes a really, really long time. And just go into it knowing that it's going to take me 10 years. And all of this whole process is it is really time consuming. And I say that as a lead into the fifth and final step, which is, how do you develop a metrics driven plan so that you can start to get closer and closer to that repeatability? So I'm going to walk you through all of the 4 steps again, as I've been doing, as the final lead into how do we build a metrics driven plan. So we have an idea of how we want to change the world. That's our vision. We have an idea of who we believe our core customer is. We might even have a bunch of them and have some validation around that. We have a strong belief in what our revenue formula is. We've mapped out all of the drivers and sub-drivers that we need in order to influence our revenue formula. We've prioritized it. We know the work that we need to be doing and the work that we still need to be collecting data on so that we can get closer and closer to that repeatability over time. We've figured out a really strong structure for measuring whether or not we were headed in the right direction, and we feel pretty good about, or maybe not yet, about the understanding our KPIs and how they influence what we believe our revenue formula is. That is the majority of the work that you need to do in order to build a metrics driven plan. Now roll up your sleeves, because this is where it does get a little tricky. Now you have to take all of that and you have to make sense of it. And the way that we believe is the best way to make sense of it, and this is regardless of the stage of your business, I don't care if you're still an idea on the back of a napkin, is to go build an assumption-based, bottoms-up financial model. This is not a backwards-looking financial model to say, we know what we did. This is a forward-looking financial model to say, here's what we believe is possible with the information we have today, built off a long list of assumptions. And sometimes that list may have 200, 300, 400, 500 assumptions on it, really, literally. Sometimes it has quite a bit less. Here's the assumptions in the business. Here's how, and when I say here's how we think the business will play out. That means you've now taken all those assumptions and you've built them inside of the model itself. That model may look out, 2 or 3 years. I don't have a problem with it looking out 5. Just know the further out, the less clear you're going to be. I do think you should at least go for 2 years, because if you're only looking at a year, you're not really starting to understand what could be possible in the long term. And so you're building out this financial model that has, all your statements of cash flow, your unit economics, and you're trying to understand all this stuff. And it's all built off of this assumptions page. And we've got some videos on how to actually do that well. But the key here is that assumptions page, so that as you're learning what your assumptions are, and you may have new ones, and you're validating those assumptions month over month over month, you'll update your new information in the assumptions tab, and it'll flow through the rest of your model. So your model, which is now your crystal ball, becomes more and more clear over time. And make no mistake, this takes a lot of time. Like, if you're really proficient in building models, it might take you 20 hours. If you're not proficient like me, it usually takes me 30 to 40 hours over the course of a couple of weeks. But that's okay, because the end result of that model is, one, a really, really deep and specific understanding of how you believe your business will actually work from the perspective of math. The other thing that you'll get is it literally will tell you what your plan is. It is telling you need to have 50 new users a month or a week for the month of February. And then you look and say, okay, my assumption is I'm going to get those 50 users in this way. And then you go and do that work, and you say, okay, I didn't get 50, I got 20. Well, why? And now you're changing your assumptions. You might be adding assumptions. And then in March, now you say, okay, I can't get 50, but I do know how to get 20. So now I'm putting 20 in. Yes, the number went down, but it went down because you understand why. It might have gone up also. So you're building this assumptions-based model. You're literally pulling your plan out of the model. It's telling you what to do. And then there's one step beyond that, which is probably the most important step, which is actually using that model and updating it. So you've got your plan. You're going back in on a regular basis, and you're saying, okay, here's how I think the business is supposed to work. And there's a lot of detail on this. Where was I right and where was I wrong? Where do I put more effort? Where do I put less effort? What do I need to learn? What do I need to learn that I didn't know I needed to learn? And it's telling you all along what it is you're supposed to be doing, so that crystal ball becomes more and more clear over time, to the point where it's so clear that you are now getting ready to, or are already a public company, or you've sold the business, but you're a public company and you're reporting, and you can say with a large degree of accuracy, we know that we're going to do exactly this in revenue. Here are all the reasons why, unless there's some change in the market that we can't anticipate. So that in its entirety is the LEVERS framework, which is starting with an idea of how you want to change the world, and what we believe is a really specific and systematic approach to getting to a plan that is metrics driven. Hey, Dustin.
Hey, Amos, did fantastic stuff. Actually, I had some questions. So while we're waiting for everyone else to kind of get theirs, get the shakes out. Come on, don't be afraid to ask questions. There are no stupid questions here, none at all. But I actually had some questions that other people that I shared the book with had asked me before this. So I thought it'd be relevant to ask them now.
Yeah, awesome.
Some people might be thinking the same things. So let's go back to the W3s, right? And I even, bad joke incoming, but I even say W4s, because literally when you go through the W3s, I feel like that's a huge wake up moment. Like, you think and I know you know this, because I'm sure there's a bunch of companies that go into Techstars and they go into W3s, and they're going in like, oh, I mean, in Techstars, I know who my customers are. Not at all, right? And so I feel like there's probably a lot of people here who are starting at that point, right? Who are like, okay, well, now I know that I need to drive further, but what are some strategies for me to start collecting that data, right? So if they're going through the customer discovery process and they're really trying to narrow down and validate those, maybe they start with assumptions, but they're trying to validate those assumptions to prove out the W3s. What are some strategies for like just calling people up, asking for customer interviews, surveys? Like, what do you suggest?
Yeah, so I would say I would do it all, right? And by all, I mean like do surveys, do research, maybe do a little bit, if you've got a tiny budget, do a little bit of testing, outside of any circle of people that you might know. That being said, I don't believe that there is a real 100% substitute for picking up the phone and actually talking to people. And two things. One, doing that in a way that is not selling, but actually learning. So like, hey, we have this idea of a thing that we think will provide value to you in a certain way. Let's talk about that so that you can identify whether or not you're on the right path with the kind of person you think you are. And if you are, there will never be a sale and you'll have a customer because you've mutually agreed that there's a thing that you're doing that provides the value that they're actually looking for, and they're gonna want to pay you or participate in some way because of that. And I think like the sort of like the important and not so nuanced but important piece here is getting someone to tell you yes they would spend money is awesome, and it is no substitute for someone actually spending money with you. So even until you get to that point, you still have to take everything with a grain of salt.
Yeah, getting to your head is important. Getting to what people say they want is great, but ultimately you really want them to take action, right?
Yeah, and by the way, this is super hard, but some of the best companies that I've seen built are selling customers and collecting money before they've developed a line of code, and making it clear, either you're paying in advance, but the service is going to be far away, or you're contractually obligated to pay once we deliver. We're going to deliver on this time frame. Mm-hmm. Often that's really, really hard to do, but that's like the greatest thing is someone is clearly defining that it's a match because they're willing to give you money before they actually even get anything, which tells you a little bit about the who also, right? Progressive people who are they understand the impact.
Absolutely. So how would you recommend, so let's say they're picking up the phone, they're calling people, they're stopping people in a parking lot, or at least trying to do it as pandemic friendly as possible, but they're having those qualitative research conversations, right? How would you suggest tracking that? Is like just put it in a spreadsheet, just put everything down, look at trends of what people are saying?
Yeah, I would say definitely track it somewhere, right? The best thing you can do, or the directionally correct thing to do, in my opinion, is to track it in a way where as you learn more, you're able to more easily pull apart and manipulate the data in ways that you may not realize are important yet. So like, it's fine to do it in a Google spreadsheet. It's going to make it more challenging to track data as you have more data points. I use Airtable because I find it to be a great way to, like, I can add things on, I can move things around, and I can pull reports based on that. I don't think there's one wrong way, but I think it is really important to be disciplined about tracking it, and even having a theory of what you think you want to track before you start, because you might be wrong, you might be right. Chances are you're wrong. The question is, do you have the wrong things? Do you have to add? Do you have to take away? Like, what matters, what doesn't matter?
Yeah. We got a question from Ryan, 3Up folks. So it was tough sometimes to know how many variables to include in the new revenue formula. What advice do you have for deciding what are variables in the revenue formula versus KPIs that drive those variables?
Yeah. Thanks for the tough question, Ryan. I mean, it is a really hard question. And the reason it's a hard question is because most people fall into one or two categories when I do the revenue formula workshop. I probably have done it for 1,000 or more founders. Either they put a lot of thought into like exactly what the right revenue formula is, and they're probably wrong. or they're so sure that they're right that they just throw something out there because they're positive their business model is right. And so I didn't say this in this talk, I don't think, but what I do say often when I give the workshop to smaller groups is you should go into developing your revenue formula with the assumption you're wrong, period. The idea is not to get it right the first time around. The idea is to put something on paper so that you have a starting point to where you believe you want to start looking at how you think your business model is going to work. So I'll get to more specifically answering Ryan's question in a second. But it is important to do that so that you have a starting point. Your revenue formula ultimately should be your top level dashboard. It's the health of the business from the highest level possible. And so this is where the nuance with KPIs come into play. So early on, like if there's some interchange between the two things as you're figuring out, like I would say the real answer to your question is, Ryan, don't worry about figuring out if you're taking this approach, it will tell you over time. The other answer is think about the KPIs or the things that you're learning about that are changing on a regular basis. Like they may change daily, weekly, monthly. And your revenue formula, once you figure that out, it is your revenue formula for a really long time, maybe for years. The other nuance is leading versus lagging metrics. Your revenue formula typically is lagging. Your KPIs are typically leading metrics.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So last question that I have, if anybody else has a question, I know Bob had a comment there. But, for multi-sided platform companies, the business model. So companies that have two customer segments and they can't really offer the value that they're trying to offer without having the other customer. So like credit card companies, Google, without any users, companies aren't going to pay for advertisement, but without any companies paying for advertisement, they don't have the funds, right? So for revenue formula for multi-sided platforms, is there a change or is there something specific that, is different than kind of how you laid it out, or how do you plug that in?
Yeah, I would say yes and no. It is what makes it more challenging is that there are an exponential amount more variables than if you're building software, and this is how to think about it. When you have, I'll call it a marketplace, right? What you're describing isn't always a marketplace, right? MasterCard's not a marketplace, but call it a marketplace because that's where the dynamic comes up the most. In your marketplace, most of the time, one side of your marketplace is the product and the other side is the customer. And think about, you're not usually getting paid by both sides. You're usually getting paid by one. So if whoever is paying you is your customer and whoever's not paying you is your product. So then go back to, the original, like, what are you, who's your customer? What are they buying from you and why are they buying it? It helps to guide the product side of that. It is still tremendously more complicated because you're not building software, you're dealing with something that has lots of variables more in it, potentially. Does that answer the question?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great way to answer that question. That's it for me. Does anybody, so we got like literally a minute left for the next panel. So if anybody has one last question, get it in right now. And while we're doing that, I'll say, thank you, Amos. This was phenomenal. I think this is a really, I know this is meant to be an overview, but I think this will definitely help everyone get into the book when they receive it. And those emails for the virtual book will go out next week. So everybody will expect a copy in your email to redeem next week from Amos for his LEVERS book, which is a phenomenal read. And gives a lot more examples and visual cues. We didn't have the slide deck today, but it'll really help to put what Amos said on paper, and it would be very helpful. So, and
just answering Matt's question, a really well played trombone, which is not back here.
That's awesome. Thank you so much again, Amos. We're going to jump right back into the table set, or actually, we're actually going to pull up the next panel right away. So Amos, thanks again, and hope to talk to you soon. And
cool.
And great having you.